Algebra 2, we're going on really a bridge lesson. Uh, the other day in class, we learned lesson 5.3. This is a lesson really going in between 5.3 and 5.4. It's an essential skill, a necessary skill, something called factoring by grouping, and it's really going to help you out a lot. Let's take a look at what it means to factor by grouping. You're going to know you have factoring by grouping when you have 4 terms. And really just want to call to your attention that we're going to always look at our first 2 terms, and then we're going to be looking at our last 2 terms. Now, if we look only at our first 2 terms, we're going to say, what is our greatest common factor? What is the largest term factor that we can divide out of a 3x squared and a 6x? The biggest number that divides into 3 and 6 is 3 itself. I'm also going to factor out an x. I'm going to divide out an x. Now, when I do that, 3x squared divided by 3x, the 3 is just going to be left with a 1, and x squared, I'm going to lose one of those. So I just have the x. 6x, when I'm dividing, and again, you're dividing by a 3x here, 6 divided by 3 is a 2, and the x's go away. So we're going to stop right there just for a moment. If you're ever wondering if you've done this correctly, you can redistribute real quickly to double check. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 2 would get you 6x. So we're not done. We're going to actually now come over to this second grouping. You can see we start with a plus, so I'm going to continue to write a plus. But what's the biggest factor that I can divide out of a 2 and a 4? Hopefully you'd agree it would be a 2. And at this point, as we factor out the 2, we're going to be left with an x, and 4 divided by 2 is just going to leave us with a 2. Now, the factoring by grouping, I want to be very, very, very clear. If you've done this correctly, you're always, always, always going to see the same parentheses here. And I'm highlighting that in blue. And what you have here with these blue parentheses, I'm going to pull that out in front. And what is left? What haven't I highlighted in blue? The 3x and the plus 2. And that is how you factor by grouping. We need to do some more examples. Let's take a look at number 2. I'm going to look at my first 2 terms here. And then I'm going to look at my last 2 terms. And as I'm looking at my first 2 terms, you can say, what can I divide out? What's the greatest thing I can take out from a 4x squared and a 1x? A lot of times kids want to say pull out a 1, and that's always understood. But the smallest power in x in common would be x to the first. So I'm going to divide out an x from both of these, and I'll just be left with a 4x. Here this would wipe out. I'd just be left with a 1. And a lot of times you can wonder if you've done this correctly. You might be a little scared at first to wonder if you've done this correctly, and you can redistribute that x to double check. Take a look in green here. I have a plus, so I'm going to start with a plus. What's the biggest number I can divide out from a 12 and a 3? What's the biggest number that goes into 12 and 3? Well, it's easy to think it's 12, but 12 doesn't go into 3 itself. You got to pull out a 3 instead. Divide out a 3 from both of these. And 12 divided by 3, you'd get 4. Here's 4x. 3 divided by 3, you'd have a 1. Here you go again, though. The parentheses have to be the same. So pull out those blue parentheses. We'll have 4x plus 1. What isn't highlighted in blue? Well, the x and the plus 3, and then we're done. That would be our factored form. Let's move on over to number 3, and we're going to continue to really break this down. We've got our first two terms, then we've got our second two terms right here. And you look at your first two terms, what's the greatest common factor that I can divide out from both of these, the x squared and the minus 3x? Well, both of them have x's, but this is just x to the first. Take out your smallest x, and if you're going to factor out an x from x squared, you'll just have one x remaining. Take this x away, you just have a minus 3. But now comes the important part. Please note that when you start with a minus in the second grouping, you're going to have to factor out a negative. Very, very, very important. That's going to show up a lot. So what's the biggest thing I can factor out from a 2 and a 6? Well, I have to factor out a negative. I'm going to have to factor out a negative 2. And guys, when you divide both of these by negative 2 divided by negative 2, you're just left with a positive x. And 6 divided by negative 2, you're going to be left with a minus 3. So here we go again. Your parentheses will always, always, always be the same if you've done this right. So in blue, I've got that x minus 3. Pull it out in front. What's remaining? Well, an x minus 2. And that's your final form. Let's take a look at this next one right here, the 18x squared plus 9x. Got this right here in green, and yellow, sorry. And in green right here, we've got our other two. So if we were to see what's happening, what's the biggest number I can divide out from 18 and 9? Well, it's got to be a 9. 18 doesn't go into 9, so that you always have to choose your smaller. And I'm also going to be able to pull out an x. Now, factoring really means divide by 9x here. So 18 divided by 9, that's a 2. One of these x's go away, you just have a 2x. Ooh, look at this one. 9x divided by 9x, that is a 1. So now we're going to come over here to green. This is a plus, so leading off, I'm going to have a plus. What's the biggest number that I can divide out from 20 and also 10? I hope you'd agree it would be a 10. And if I'm going to divide by 10, 20 divided by 10, that's a 2, and I'm left with an x. 10 divided by 10, that's just a 1. And here we go again. These parentheses will always be the same. If you're factoring correctly, you're going to get identicals. Pull that out. Pull out a 2x plus 1. And imagine that's gone. Maybe that can also help you. Imagine that, now that you've factored it, it's gone. What's left? Well, a 9x plus 10. And that's going to be your final answer. Let's take a look at number 5. So for number 5, we've got our first two terms here. And in green, we're going to have our second two terms. And we'll say, what can I factor out from x squared plus 5x? What do they have in common? And I hope we'll agree that's an x. That's the only thing I can take away from both. I can divide that out. I'll have an x plus 5. I can redistribute and check that that is correct. Look at your last two terms here. It starts with the minus. Here we go again. What does that mean? You have to divide out or factor out a negative. And as I'm looking at negative 2 and negative 10, A negative 2 goes into both. But understand, when you're factoring, guys, you're dividing. And negative 2 divided by negative 2, well, that's just a 1 or just an x. Negative 10 divided by negative 2 is a plus 5. And here we go again. You know that you've done this correctly when those two parentheses at the end are the same. So pull that out. Here's your x plus 5. Again, it's almost like you're envisioning that this is gone. You've pulled that out. What's left? X minus 2. Okay? I think we've got time for maybe one more. Let's take a look at number 7 down below, skip 1. This gets to be a little bit trickier. Look at these two terms right here. You can bring that out in yellow. And over here we'll have something in green. You could say, what can I divide out from a 9x squared and a minus 6x? Well, 6 doesn't divide evenly into 9, but a 3 does. And I can factor out a 3x. And what I'm doing, when I'm saying factor out, I'm saying divide. 9x squared divided by 3x would be a 3x. 6 divided by 3 would be a 2. I'd have a minus 2 and my x's would be gone. Now again, look at this. I've got a minus. That means I've got to factor out a negative. And what's the biggest number that divides into a 12 and an 8? Well, not 8, because 8 doesn't go evenly into 12. A lot of times kids want to say it's 2, but you want to find the greatest common factor. 4 would go into both. And in fact, I'm going to divide both of these by negative 4. Negative 12 divided by negative 4 is a positive 3x. 8 divided by negative 4 would be a minus 2. And guys, I hope you can see here is this reoccurring theme. These parentheses will always, always, always be the same. So what am I left with? Well, pull out your 3x minus 2 and imagine that you're taking it away. What's left? A 3x minus 4. So we're not going to do every single problem on this note sheet. But on the back, we do have something very different. In Alex, we don't have an assignment. This is a paper copy assignment. So we're going to do the worksheet on the back for homework. I'm going to be checking it in. Many students have yet to finish 5.3 in Alex. So that's really what we're going to be doing for the rest of the period.